Okay, so this is part 2 of the video on the One Project. I decided to talk about the backstory of my research into the One Project. So continuing on with my talk here, the General Conference released a statement recently, about 2 weeks ago at the Spring Council, where they set out some guidelines regarding how any ministry or movement in the Seventh Adventist Church should be evaluated by each individual member of the Seventh Adventist Church. The statement was issued by the General Conference and his division presidents, which are vice presidents of the General Conference, and they said the Executive Committee as well. And so a few days later, Spectrum Magazine published a response from one of the founders of the One Project, and he said that it was tragic that the leaders had misunderstood the One Project. And then another leader of the One Project also responded and talked a little bit about the fruits of the One Project and the fact that even his girl was converted by the One Project meetings and gave her heart to Christ. So if you're going to judge the One Project by their fruits, you need to consider this as well. So and then a few days later after that, there was a letter, I think it was last weekend, there was a letter that was released by an anonymous member of the General Conference Executive Committee, questioning the process by which the General Conference President and his vice presidents had gone through to issue this statement, and also questioning the validity of the statement and the authority of the statement, alleging that perhaps the Executive Committee had not officially voted this statement, and so it is not binding on anybody, and just raising some of the constitutional questions regarding that. Having given you the sufficient background into this, now I'm going to talk about some of the issues that are related to the One Project, and also the conservative Adventist ministries that raised issues regarding the One Project, and also the ecclesiology of the North American division in general. So in my research, I found that there's various theological methods that are rampant in the Seventh Adventist Church. Some of them have a long, history that goes back maybe close to 100 years of history. The earliest one is the historical Adventist trend. This one started with M.L. Andreasen in the early 1900s and continued on till his death in the 1960s. The other one was an early evangelical Adventist trend that began with Leroy Froom, and it matured in 1957. And both of these movements clashed in 1957 over a visit by certain Reformed theologians that came to question the Adventist Church regarding its views on soteriology and eschatology, and then those two movements fractured, and progressive Adventism resulted in the 1960s, and biblical Adventism resulted in the 1980s after Desmond Ford. So these four theological factions have been present for the last 30 years or so in the Seventh Adventist Church, and these theological factions, the interplay between these factions gives rise to ministries like the One Project. So looking at and evaluating the One Project in this lens, using the systematic theological lens, I was able to understand the theological underpinnings of the One Project, and I was able to understand precisely what solutions that they're offering and the implications of those solutions. And you can obviously look at my research. So in the Create Conference, the recordings, which you can access at intelligentadventist.com. I'll also put the recordings in the comments of this video so that you can access them a little bit easier. They discussed the local church, they discussed education, and then they discussed various aspects within those two topics. In the local church, Dr. Alex Bryan discussed pastoral training and standards, and the fact that many of the Bible schools produce pastors that are hired by the conferences, and that creates problems where the training is not adequate. He talked about the role of money in the local church and how money flows from the local church to higher levels of the Adventist church, and then very little money comes back, and so the local church is starved. He talked about the role of the remnant identity and how it contributes to a certain trend or a certain way that Adventist members view themselves in relationship with other denominations and the community context around them. And he alleged that it was this remnant identity that was problematic, and that it contributed to kind of an insularity in the Adventist members at large. And so, and then he gave his personal views on that aspect as well. In my interviews with another founder, Pastor Sam Lenore, I asked him about the positional positional understanding of the One Project regarding the Adventist Church in relation to other churches around them, and he gave me answers that I thought were less than satisfactory. And then when I asked about the investigative judgment, the doctrine of the investigative judgment, and the theology behind it, he said that the founders were nuanced on this issue, and that I would need to talk to Dr. Alex Bryan separately to figure out his views on this stuff. So in my opinion, if your own team members can't vouch for you regarding your views on some basic Adventist beliefs, there's got to be there needs to be more scrutiny involved in this. Going on, they discussed education and the fact that there's declining enrollment in the Seventh Adventist Church. They didn't tie the theological fragmentation that is occurring in the local church with the fact that members are seeing less and less need to send their kids to Adventist universities. But they discussed the declining enrollment and the impact it has had on the universities. Now, most of the founders are attached to universities, and so they kind of gave their view of what was going on, especially at La Sierra University. Pastor Sam Lenore talked about how La Sierra University decided not to compete with other Adventist universities for students, and instead they decided to compete for Christian students outside the Adventist Church, and other students as well at public high schools around Southern California. And he talked about the fact that the enrollment at La Sierra has now switched to where the majority of the students are non-Adventist, and the minority of the students are Adventist. He talked about how the impact that has had on the theological curriculum, because now you're dealing with people who've never heard of God, who don't understand God, and may even have different goals regarding education. And so how do you communicate what the Adventist Church believes, and what is the mission of the educational university if it's teaching students that are not Adventist? So in building his views or his arguments all the way through, you can read about that in the 4th article of my series, and you can also listen to the recordings as well. There are certain implications that arise from this, from the problems that he was bringing up, and the questions of the identity of the Adventist Church, the question of the role of education and higher education in the Seventh Adventist Church, the role of educating, the purpose of educating our children in these schools, and obviously our impact on the world at large. There was some discussion about the smarter metrics of the local church. There was some discussion about the money. There was discussion about administrative levels in the local church, and above in the Seventh Adventist Church itself. And then there were some implementation ideas that were given during the Create conference that I analyzed. So in terms of my takeaways for the One Project and my research in general, I think we need to evaluate or reevaluate the role of independent ministries and their access to local churches. We need to evaluate the fact that these ministries are operating under pressures and paradigms that are not part of the Seventh Adventist Church. For example, each of these ministries that participated in the so-called exposing of the One Project, they are accountable to boards. They're accountable to ministries, to boards that are formed by themselves, and their theological accountability is non-existent. It largely depends on what the founder of the ministry decides to do. I evaluated their financial background that I could access. By the way, I wasn't able to access the finances of the One Project ministry. So I'll discuss the One Project ministry finances and some of their accountability separately. But just talking about the conservative Adventist ministries that targeted the One Project, I accessed some of their finances from the IRS using their 990 form search. You can do that fairly easily through Google or through the IRS. I found that several of these ministries made millions of dollars over the 5 to 7 year period that they targeted the One Project. I'm not against a ministry being profitable. I'm not against a ministry being sustainable. I'm just saying that there needs to be a discussion about the role of money that is being derived from the local church, because these ministries, they go to local churches and they sell their DVDs and their series materials, books and donations and that sort of thing from members, and then they also get recurring donations from these members. So there needs to be some questions asked about the role of those donations and the impact of those donations on the larger Seventh Adventist Church. At the same time, not all ministries are successful or millionaire. Not everyone is a millionaire watchman, so to speak. And so there are ministries that continually have to produce more and more sensationalist material in order to make their rent payments and their bill payments and things like that. And that was that we have a very good case study of what that looks like, and it isn't pretty. That case study revolves another independent minister named David Gates. The fact that he fired his board when they tried to oppose him, and he reinstituted a new board, and he's continued to have theological confrontations with the General Conference itself. So the role of money, the role of theological accountability, the theological methods that these ministries use, the questionable theological research that these ministers use, and then their free access to the local churches, all of these things should be evaluated, in my opinion. I also, now switching to the church now, I think that the church needs to create a board and a rating system by which that they demand transparency and accountability of these independent ministries, so that they can be evaluated, and that the ones that are actually good and are contributing a measurable impact in the local church, those should be encouraged, and they should we should be able to use the talents of these ministers in augmenting the work that is being done at the local church level. But on the flip side of it, now let's talk about the One Project. The accountability of the One Project I found to be less than adequate. For me, looking at the One Project, I was never able to understand how they were kept theologically accountable, because they had formed under the auspices of the Boulder Seventh Adventist Church, so they were technically under the conference that is over the Boulder Seventh Adventist Church. But the head of the Boulder Seventh Adventist Church is one of the founders of the One Project. So to me, that created a conflict of interest that was unresolved. And then this ministry operated outside the conference, in other divisions. And so if anyone had any theological problems with the One Project, say in the Australian division or the Trans-European division, it wasn't clear to me how those problems could be handled. The other thing about the One Project was that in all their memorabilia or their communication online and in person to me, they continued to assert that they were not an independent ministry, that they were part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But when you are saying that you are part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and that you are the Seventh-day Adventist Church itself, it's like you do need to have certain kinds of standards that you uphold, that the Seventh-day Adventist Church stands for. But those standards were either questioned or were undermined or were outright dismissed. And so in their talks and in their interviews and things like that. And so those were the things that I had some questions about, and I wondered how they could be considered part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and at the same time, take advantage of the Seventh-day Adventist Church brand and authority and have access to the local churches, but at the same time reject financial, theological, and other forms of accountability. So this is a concern that I have going forward with their global collaboration effort. I want to make sure that if there is anyone that is, in the leadership structures in various divisions or whatever, can consider some of these issues and issue some directives so that we can understand how the One Project is to be understood. I personally suggest that the One Project should be classified as an independent ministry. That way they're allowed to continue to hold their beliefs, and they're allowed to continue to practice what they believe and share what they believe, and the church can then evaluate them and decide whether or not they want to accept that model that they are proposing and those theological methods and differences that they're proposing in their that they're proposing in general. I found that their theological method and their hermeneutic is a gospel-based hermeneutic or a Christocentric hermeneutic. This is not the same as being Christ-centered. It's actually using the gospel to reinterpret the Bible. It's not the Adventist theological method. The Adventist theological method takes the entire Bible into context. It uses the sanctuary as the basis for its formulation of its beliefs system, and within the sanctuary system, all of our doctrines find their place. But using the Christocentric system, things like the investigative judgment and other aspects of our eschatological based identity, prophetic identity, and our understanding of various eschatological implications all kind of fall to the wayside in their model. And so these are some of the things that I would encourage anyone that is evaluating the One Project to consider. You obviously have the access to the Create Conference recordings. You can listen to those as well, and you can also access my research that is published online. To the members of the leaders and members of the One Project themselves, I feel that there are many within the One Project that are sincere, that have seen a difference in their lives because of the One Project. To them, I want to encourage them. I feel like people are conflating two things. Just because there is theological scrutiny of a ministry and their methods does not negate the effect that Christ is still reaching out and that he wants to save you. If you read the Bible for yourself and you understand the Bible from start to finish and you see the whole picture of salvation that the Bible presents, you will come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And if you are willing to accept the person of Jesus Christ into your life, you will be saved. And that is true on the conservative side of things as well. Just because I am asking for theological scrutiny of the conservative Adventist movements does not mean that people can't be saved within those movements. It just means that or despite those movements, or despite the one project. It just means that God has His church that He has established, and we have derived our identity and our prophetic reason for existence through Scripture. And we have that prophetic identity and that relationship with Jesus Christ compels us to share our message to the world in ways that are that allow people to live life more abundantly and to look forward to Christ's coming and understand where we are in history and what we are to do at this time in history. So it is my hope and prayer that you will listen to these recordings, you will read my research, and you will think about some of the things that I've talked about in these two videos, and you will also use the criteria that the General Conference issued to evaluate any ministry, not just the one project, and evaluate the impact of your time and effort spent in supporting these ministries, and versus doing something else. I encourage you to be active in the Seventh Adventist Church. I encourage you to reach out to your friends. I encourage you to communicate with Jesus every day through prayer and through the study of His Word. Thank you.